Hello my chess friends. Today I have a spectacular game to show you, but before I start, please excuse my scratchy voice as I have been sick. So this game between Carlsen and Abdussaturov from the recently completed World Rapid Championship has everything you are looking for in a Magnus Carlsen performance. You will see both players dodging any computer prep by playing some unusual opening moves. You will see Carlsen launch a crazy looking middle game attack when he makes a rebellious move that says, "I don't care about your obsolete ideas about king safety. I, the great and powerful Magnus, can beat you with weird-looking substandard moves, which you won't know how to deal with." And it works. Abdussaturov eventually crumbles, but not before Carlsen gives him a few chances for survival by missing a few absolutely brilliant computer moves, which I will also show you briefly. So sit back and enjoy the show. This game is a good one. Magnus Carlsen begins the game with one of the most popular and strongest opening moves of all time, b3. Of course, I'm only kidding. b3 is neither traditionally a popular move, nor is it strong, and according to Stockfish, with this move, White has thrown away most of the slight opening advantage that he began the game with. But what Carlsen gets in return is a significant reduction in the probability that he will run into some opening computer prep by his opponent, who responds with the move e5. Bishop b2 by Carlsen, attacking the e-pawn. It's defended with knight to c6. Now Carlsen plays the most popular move. Among the relatively few games that have ever reached this position, he plays e3, which is strangely superior to the move e4, which is probably what I would have played. Apparently e4 is inferior to e3 because knight to f6 attacks the pawn and White will have to defend it in some substandard way. If you play d3, you're blocking your bishop. If you play knight to c3, you're blocking this bishop. So by playing the move e3, after knight f6, White has no pawn under attack and can just go ahead with knight to f3. And now Black is a bit inconvenienced, having to defend the e-pawn. If you play d6, you're blocking your dark squared bishop. So the most popular thing for Black to do here is to play e4, and White will usually respond knight to d4. But Abdussaturov plays a strange defense here. Perhaps he's trying to one-up Magnus Carlsen on playing weird opening moves, bishop to d6. Which is the kind of move that most beginners learn not to play pretty early in their chess journey. Normally you don't want to block a central pawn early in the opening like this, and the engine doesn't like this move, but in this situation, this move might not be quite as bad as you might think. Black's plan is to eventually move this bishop off of d6, and then get in the move d5 in one move. As opposed to defending with d6, then if you ever play d5, you take in two moves. So you are wasting a move with the bishop by moving it twice, to d6, and then to some other square so you can play d5, but you're saving a move with the d-pawn. And maybe there's even some attacking potential with the move e4 when the black bishop is pointed at White's kingside. Magnus Carlsen plays c4, taking some control in the center, perhaps anticipating the possibility of a future d5. The engine likes this move, but it thinks that he should have played d3 first, just to stop any e4. Black would lose a pawn after pawn takes, knight takes, bishop takes g7. But Abdussaturov does not play e4, he castles. And now Carlsen plays d3. And e4 is still discouraged here, because if Black were to play that, there would be d takes e4, knight takes e4, and bishop d3, giving White some unnecessary activity, allowing him to rid himself of the d3 pawn and put his bishop there instead, pointing right at Black's kingside. That bishop duo can be very dangerous. So Abdussaturov wisely avoids that and plays rook to e8 instead. And here we have a3 from Carlsen. Might look a little slow for this stage of the opening, but it's a multi-purpose move. It prevents any bishop b4 check, limiting Black's options, since he'll probably want to move that bishop and play d5, as we said. It also might be good to keep the knight off b4, where it could potentially target the pawn on d3, if Black does play d5 and the d-file opens. And finally, it supports the move b4, some queenside expansion, maybe b5, kicking that knight away from its post. So it's a good move and one of the computer's top choices. We got a5 from Abdussaturov, stopping the expansion with b4, and maybe looking to push the pawn to a4 somewhere down the road and try to open up a file for this rook. Carlsen develops his light squared bishop, bishop e2, preparing the castle, and now bishop to f8, preparing the d5 thrust. That is the best square for the bishop. You might think, why not bishop c5? A little more active? Well, now d4 can be played, hitting the bishop, and after e takes d4, the bishop moves, and then we got d5. That's a little too much central expansion to allow White. bishop f8 is superior. Carlsen castles, and now black gets in d5. Magnus Carlsen responds with the best move. He takes the pawn on d5. Otherwise, black would be pushing to d4, gaining a little too much space, and if white were to play d4 to stop that, well, then there's e4, forcing the f3 knight to a substandard square. You don't want that either. So c takes d5 is the best move, and after knight takes d5, white's got two central pawns versus black's one central pawn, but this d3 pawn could be a potential target for black. Carlsen plays knight b to d2. Knight c3 would not be quite as good, since this just helps black. After knight takes c3, bishop takes c3. Black now has no pieces blocking his view of the weak d3 pawn and can immediately target it with bishop to f5. If the knight was still on d5 and did not take the knight on c3, this would not work because there would be the fork. So white is best to avoid this exchange. That's why Carlsen plays knight b to d2. And now we got f6, adding some protection to the e5 pawn, which will make possible bishop to e6. Now Carlsen plays queen to c2, which is a fine move. The computer likes it, but it does allow bishop to f5 now, because it takes protection off the e2 bishop. After bishop f5, which is what Abdussaturov plays, e4 does not win a piece any longer because knight to f4 will attack the bishop, which is newly undefended after the queen moved. And this is actually a winning position for black. So instead of e4, Carlsen plays rook f to e1, adding protection to the bishop, so the e4 is again a threat. So Abdussaturov gets his bishop out of danger with bishop to g6. An interesting decision, keeping some pressure on the d3 pawn, but leaving this diagonal to his king a little vulnerable, which wouldn't be the case if he had moved his bishop to e6 instead. But either move is fine. And here Carlsen plays a crazy move. This is a move that I would never play. It just flies in the face of everything I thought I knew about how to manage the pawn cover in front of your king. Carlsen plays g4, which to me looks like a beginner move. And the engine does not like it, but it does not think it's losing. Carlsen is a master at finding these moves, which are not objectively best, and may even look very dubious on the surface, yet are highly playable, and often very effective at throwing his opponent off. So this move looks crazy, just thrusting a pawn out in front of your king. The pawn has no protection, but black does not have a lot of ways to target that pawn immediately, and it can be defended in one move, with knight to h4. And Carlsen's king is actually safer than he may appear. He's planning king to h1, rook to g1, and guess who has an attack along the g-file? So that's the plan, and Abdussaturov, faced with this very strange, unexpected move, not surprisingly, does not find the best response. He plays the very natural-looking queen to d7, just immediately targeting the pawn, which isn't a bad move, but the engine said black could have gained a bit of an advantage by playing this move a4. Looking to open the file, get counterplay with the rook, and white would love to respond b4 here, but then black can play knight c takes b4, a takes b4, knight takes b4, sacrificing a piece for two pawns, looking to pick up a third pawn on d3 with an attack on the queen. This is not great for white, so better would be to just take out the pawn on a4, winning a pawn for a moment, but after knight to b6, that pawn will fall, and black has this nice open file to work with. But Abdussaturov plays this queen d7 move instead, threatening to take out the pawn with check, but Carlsen does not defend the pawn. He plays king to h1. Because if queen takes g4 were to be played, white could grab this important e-pawn with knight takes e5 with a discovered attack on the queen. So that's no good for black. So instead, Abdussaturov plays rook a to d8, adding defense to his center, placing another piece opposite white's weak d-pawn. And now we get knight to e4 from Carlsen. It's a good move, placing a piece in the center, blocking the bishop's view of the d3 pawn. So if this knight on d5 moves, black will not be threatening to capture that pawn. And now king to h8. A nice prophylactic move, getting the king off of the g-file, which could potentially open up if white continues his attack by placing rooks on the g-file and playing g5. Also gets the king off of this diagonal, along which it was a bit vulnerable. And now Carlsen responds with a prophylactic move himself, rook a to d1. It's good to add some more defense to this d3 pawn. If you were to play the natural-looking rook to g1, black can get away with knight c to b4, which is playable despite the fact that this move did not capture a pawn. After a takes b4, knight takes b4, white would be winning here if he could play queen to c4 with check. But since black removed his king from that diagonal, after the white queen moves, let's say to b1, black is free to take out the pawn on d3, and in this position only has two pawns for the piece, but has a lot of activity on the only open file. and this aggressively placed knight, threatening to win the knight on e4. So perhaps Carlsen saw this variation and decided that it was an option he did not want to allow his opponent. So by adding extra defense to d3, black will not win the d3 pawn in that line, rendering it unplayable. So Abdussaturov plays bishop to f7. He's got a new plan involving the move a4, which this bishop is helping to prepare. Rook g1 by Carlsen, supporting g5 whenever the time is right. Now knight to b6, opening up the bishop. Carlsen plays rook to g3, preparing to double his rooks. And now a4 by Abdussaturov, compelling Carlsen to take the pawn on a4. He would much rather play b4, but this would allow bishop to b3, winning the exchange. So Carlsen plays the right move. B takes a4, and now knight a5, threatening bishop b3 once again, defended by the knight. So Carlsen gets his rook off of that diagonal with the move rook to g1. And now on move 21, Abdussaturov begins to go awry. He plays bishop d5. Cosmetically, very nice, placing the bishop on this diagonal to the white king. Looks like it should have some good attacking potential there. But correct was knight takes a4. Black should try to eliminate this dark squared bishop of white's. If white were to try to preserve that bishop with bishop a1 while there's just knight b3, you're not saving your bishop from the knight for bishop trade. But after bishop d5, Carlsen now is able to play g5, because after f5, played by Abdussaturov, he has a beautiful winning sacrifice, which he does not find. He played knight c3 here, but could have won with knight to f6 with the fork, and black can only take it with the g-pawn, giving white a dangerous attack after g takes f6. This bishop is the only thing preventing checkmate on g8. There's also a lot of danger to this e-pawn, hit by two pieces. If that pawn could be eliminated, then this bishop would be a grave danger to black's king. So the critical line here found by the computer is queen to c6, looking to take out that pawn, which would add defense to e5, also hoping to trade queens, which would of course reduce white's attacking prospects, but here the move is queen to b1, and after queen takes f6, e4 comes with tempo on the bishop, which is a significant part of the reason why bishop d5 was not a good move. That bishop has to stay on this diagonal or else there'll be checkmate, so bishop to f7, but then there would be rook to g5, attacking this pawn twice. There's no good way to defend. Of course, if the pawn moves, then this e5 pawn will fall, being hit by the rook, the knight, and the bishop. Defending that pawn with the bishop is not adequate because that bishop needs to watch over g8. You know, pawn takes, bishop takes, you got the checkmate. So this pawn is going away, and once that happens, the e5 pawn is in jeopardy. So this variation is only winning for white because he has this dark squared bishop, which is why it would have been much better for black to take out that bishop when he had the chance, instead of playing bishop d5. But Carlsen unfortunately does not find that winning sacrifice. He plays knight to c3, after which Abdussaturov makes another inferior move. He plays bishop to c6, giving white a free move to continue the attack. If he had played the superior bishop to b3, Carlsen would have to move his queen to a slightly inferior square, and then it would be black's turn to move again, giving him an extra move to try to parry this very dangerous attack by white. And white is better here, but not necessarily winning. But after bishop c6, it is now Carlsen who has the move, and he plays e4. It's a very strong move, fixing this pawn on a dark square, making it a permanent target. Black would like to stop the g-pawn from advancing with the move g6, but that's just one step closer to an open diagonal to the black king, and will make it that much more dangerous if this e-pawn can be removed from the board. So for that reason, g6 is not a great move here, according to the engine. h4 is losing for black. The white attack is just coming too fast. So Abdussaturov plays what is probably the best try in this position, which may already be losing for black. Knight takes a4, regaining the pawn, maybe hoping to eliminate that bishop, but unfortunately now there's a knight on c3, which can capture the knight on a4, which is what Carlsen does. Bishop takes a4, attacking Carlsen's queen, but queen c3 comes with an attack on the knight and hits the e5 pawn with a third piece, forcing Abdussaturov to play a move which would not be his ideal move in this position if not for these threats. He plays knight to c6, defending e5, getting the knight out of danger. So Carlsen seizes the opportunity to play g6, lest black prevent it by playing g6 himself. And here Abdussaturov would very much love to play h6 to prevent the opening of the g-file, but perhaps he saw the crushing knight to g5. Threatening the fork on f7, if you remove the knight, there would be rook h3 check, king g8, rook takes g5, threatening rook h5 followed by mate, which black doesn't have a good way to prevent unless he can get rid of this g-pawn. So something like rook e6 is necessary, so that after the rook moves here to h5, you can take on g6. But now there's queen c4 check. The diagonal must be blocked. If you play queen to e6, white has the beautiful e takes f5 with the fork. Queen can't take because it's pinned, but the queen can take the queen. And if you think that black can survive after d takes c4, you would be correct. But if you think that's the best move for white, you would be incorrect, because here there is f takes g6, queen sacrifice. And this is a checkmate in 3. There's no permanent solution to the threat of rook h8 mate. So that's a very pleasing winning attack by white that we very well could have seen in this game if Magnus Carlsen was playing a player of a lower caliber. But he's playing Abdussaturov, who knows better, and therefore avoids h6 and plays knight to d4 instead. He really wants to eliminate this knight on f3 because he has foreseen that knight g5 will be a crushing move. So with this move, knight d4, he's threatening to take the bishop on e2 and threatening to take out the knight on f3. But Carlsen plays it anyway. He says, please take my bishop. Abdussaturov obliges him, now forking his rook and queen. But at this point, Carlsen does not find the best move. He should have played queen to c4, and the game is effectively over, allowing the knight to take out the rook on g3 with check. But after rook takes g3, knight to f7 is such a huge threat that black has no way to save his game. The threat here is, if black were to play something like, let's say, h6, there'd be knight f7 check, king g8's the only move, knight h6, double check with the queen and knight, king goes to h8, and then queen to g8 mate. So it's absolutely essential that black removes that knight from the board as soon as it gets to f7. So you got to play rook e7, but after g takes h7, there's no good defense to checkmate on g8. You got to start giving up material, putting something in the way. So Carlsen missed his chance to win very quickly with that line and played knight to f7 check instead, which gives black some chance of survival. After the following line played in the game, queen takes f7, g takes f7, knight takes the queen on c3, Carlsen gets a new queen. And here if Abdussaturov would have played rook takes e8, he may have got away with a draw. The point is, after bishop takes c3, he's able to put the bishop on c6. That's where he needs to have his light squared bishop pointing at Carlsen's king. The reason is that white will not effectively be able to open up this diagonal. With the bishop here, for the moment this pawn's under attack, so after f3, king g8, what white would like to play is d4, forcing the trade of these pawns, but black's threats are coming first along this diagonal. After he takes on e4, it's not quite working. If you play this, there's e takes f3, and after e6, white has almost arrived on the g7 square, but f2 check is the end for white. So according to the engine, rook takes e8 gives black some drawing chances, despite being the exchange down. But Abdussaturov played bishop takes e8 instead, and after Carlsen plays bishop takes c3, this pawn is not defended, as it was in the previous line, where the rook was on e8. So if black were to try to defend with bishop d6, then d4 is working well for white. This diagonal is going to open, and black's in trouble. Abdussaturov tries the counterattack on the e-pawn by playing bishop g6, but this is not working for black, since this pawn is undefended, and this bishop is not on the diagonal pointed towards the white king. And after Carlsen's move, e takes f5, bishop takes f5, bishop takes e5, Abdussaturov plays bishop takes d3, and here Carlsen finds the correct winning move, which is not bishop takes g7 check, since after bishop takes g7, rook takes g7, there would be bishop e4 check. You'll have to put a rook in the way, but then rook to g8 leaves white all tied up. You can only make a pawn move, and then this pawn starts running, and black wins. Which is why Carlsen takes on g7 with the rook instead, which forces an immediate resignation from Abdussaturov. Since after bishop takes g7, rook takes g7, white is threatening the deadly discovered checkmate. In this position, bishop to e4 check could be dealt with the self-pinning rook to g2 checkmate, since a pinned piece, while unable to move, can still aid in checkmating the opponent's king, covering this square, and the black king has nowhere to go. So that concludes my coverage of this game. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe to the channel for more quality analysis of Magnus Carlsen's greatest games, coming your way soon.